Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
You're listening to Reverie, True Crime, your gateway to the darkest corners of human nature, where we expose the hidden truths of human depravity. These harrowing stories serve as a sobering reminder to keep our senses keen and our awareness sharp, for predators lurk in unexpected places, patiently waiting and observing. Join us as we unravel mysteries, explore motives, and seek justice for victims as we bring awareness to these cases. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. Hong Kong is known for its bright lights, fast pace, and being mostly safe for a global city and financial hub. That's part of why this case took over the headlines in 1999 and into the year 2000. It wasn't just the brutality of what happened, but also where it happened. A very packed, modern city with one of the lowest homicide rates in the world. People were stunned that something so depraved had happened right under their noses. Some stories are so brutal, so beyond our comprehension, that even investigators who are used to horrible crime scenes and mind-boggling cases struggle to speak of. There are certain cases that leave a mark not only on the pages of history, but inside of our minds. This is one of those stories. The name Man-yee may not be known to everyone around the world, but in Hong Kong, it's connected with a crime so horrific the media had a hard time finding a way to describe it. But eventually, they landed on something that made it all the more haunting. The Hello Kitty murder. Let's get into it. Man-yee was a 23-year-old mother. She was a young woman who had slipped through society's cracks. She lived a life that was already the product of really hard times and survival. Fan had been overlooked most of her life. Born in Shenzhen in 1976, Fan Mei spent some of her years in a modest home with her mother and aunt. Fan was quiet, studious, and smart enough to pursue further education, but after finishing Form 6, she stepped into the workforce as a retail sales clerk. Things changed when her mother remarried, and Fan lost touch with the secure life she'd known. She was put into an orphanage and left to fend for herself. There, the kids were passed around and neglected. At just 15 years old, Fan was pushed out of the orphanage she'd been placed in due to so many younger children coming in. With no one to rely on, she became homeless and drifted into a world of poverty, addiction, and survival. She started using drugs and eventually turned to street prostitution. By the age of 21, she had graduated from street sex work to a brothel. She was working at a place known as Romance Villa in Sham Shui Po. In 1996, Fan met Ng Shi Yuan, a man she knew from that world who was also struggling with addiction. Eventually, they got married, and in March of 1997, they moved into a small flat in Lai Yu Estate with Ng's mother, hoping to build a family. Their son was born in November of 1998, just as Fan began a determined effort to change her life. She left drugs and sex work behind and started working, by all accounts, as a hostess at Empress Karaoke Club. This wasn't a safe job, but it offered her a chance, a way to earn money while trying to give her son a better future. Stability was still an issue in her marriage and home life. Neighbors reported frequent fights between Fan and her husband, and her life was still marked by a financial struggle, fueled by a lingering addiction and a cycle she couldn't fully escape, no matter how hard she tried. Her son brought her peace, and she wanted to make a better life for him and herself. Desperate and struggling with addiction, Fan made a decision that would cost her everything. She stole one of her customers' wallets. It was in the spring of 1999 when Fan stole 4,000 Hong Kong dollars from 33-year-old Chan Man-lok, which was roughly 500 US dollars. Triads are organized crime groups, and Chan was a Wo Shing Wo triad member. He was also one of Fan's regular customers who saw her not as a person, but as someone who owed him. Chan had a history of troubling behavior, such as drug trafficking convictions and ties to organized crime. She tried to make it right, returning the money along with an extra 10,000 Hong Kong dollars in quote-unquote interest, but Chan demanded more. After she couldn't pay the additional 16,000 Hong Kong dollars that he wanted, events spiraled into absolute horror. After Fan's desperate attempt to settle the debt, the situation turned dark. He hired two young men, Lung Xing Cho, who was 27, and Liang Wei Lun, who was 21. Since they both have the same first names, I will be using their last names going forward. Both of them worked at a retail store near Granville Road, and there was someone else in Chan's circle, a 14-year-old girl named Lao Ming Fong, known as Ah Fong. She was groomed into Chan's world, and she was the so-called girlfriend of the youngest three men, Wei Lun. She was called his girlfriend, but of course she was a groomed, preyed upon child, and a victim too. Chan's apartment was on the third floor of number 31 Granville Road. This was a space decorated entirely in Hello Kitty across kitchenware, curtains, and bedding, with porn, meth, and video games scattered alongside. What came next was a month-long nightmare that had nothing to do with justice or repayment. It was about power, domination, and brutality beyond the imagination. The original plan was to force Fan back into prostitution until she paid off her so-called debt. But when they got into that apartment, everything changed. Witness testimony and court records tell a story of methodical torture. From the first night, Fan was stomped on 50 times, with Chan's associates taking turns. This torture was carried out behind the closed doors of Chan's rundown apartment. What was done to Fan cannot be summed up in headlines, no matter how sensational they tried to be. There was no news alert, missing person bulletin, or outcry from the public. She was a young mother from the outskirts, and for too long, women like Fan have disappeared in total silence. They kept Fan imprisoned in Chan's apartment for over a month, All the while, they were high as kites on drugs and turned her imprisonment into a routine of extreme torment. Psychiatric evaluations later described them as remorseless and cold, having no empathy. For 30 days, they unleashed that wickedness on Fan. Ah Fong, the 14-year-old girl, would later testify about one night early on when Xing Cho kicked Fan repeatedly while Ah Fong watched and even praised it by joining in with a slap that was instigated by the others. Fan was beaten with metal bars and burned with metalled plastic and candle wax all over her body, even the soles of her feet. They poured chili oil into her wounds and eyes. At times, they strung her up to the ceiling by her wrists with electrical wire, beating her with metal bars and wooden blocks, using her as their punching bag. They urinated on her and made her eat feces while they laughed. They burned her skin and raped her. They would leave her barely conscious as they went into the next room to play video games, ignoring her cries of pain. The cruelty was relentless. Their nonstop violence became their entertainment. As time passed, there were so many open wounds and infection was spreading. The men's fear that Fan might die or that someone might notice grew, but it wasn't enough to make them stop. By mid-April, Fan succumbed to the torture that she suffered in that apartment between April 14th and 15th. Authorities couldn't say if it was the savage beatings or the drugs, but her being in and out of consciousness, the fractures, the burns, all of it pointed to the torture as the driving force. Once she was deceased, they began disposing of her body. They dismembered her with a saw in the bathtub, boiled her body parts on the stove, sometimes even alongside their own food, using the same utensils. They got rid of most of her remains by putting them in garbage bags and throwing them in dumpsters across Kowloon and Hong Kong Island, but kept her skull. Fan's skull was boiled down and then sewn inside a Hello Kitty mermaid plush. Then they tucked it away inside the apartment's refrigerator. All of this went unseen and unheard by neighbors, and police had no idea until May 24th, when the guilt began to be way too much for a 14-year-old little girl's mind to bear. Ah Fong walked into a Hong Kong police station and told them what she had seen. She couldn't hold it in anymore because she said she was being followed, not by a person, but by Fan Man-yee's ghost. At first, they didn't believe her. She told them of a young woman tied with electrical wires, a mother tortured until she stopped moving. The police hesitated because she was a child and her story sounded like something out of a horror movie. She said the woman's spirit was visiting her in her dreams, showing her the pain, the suffering, and the torture that she experienced in that flat on Granville Road in the Kowloon district. She told police it wasn't just something she saw, it was something she had taken part in. That's when the police started taking her a little more seriously. She said she, her quote-unquote boyfriend, and two of his friends had held a woman captive in a third-floor apartment and tortured her until she died. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong or a quick, impulsive act of violence. It was intentional. The girl later said, quote, "I had a feeling it was for fun." Ah Fong was known to have ties to triads. Wei Lun, the young man who groomed her, was one of them. The officers chalked it up to attention seeking at first. Maybe she was high or mentally ill. However, once the police thought about it, they decided to send 3 officers to the flat just to check it out. They didn't expect to find what they did. When they walked through the door, they were hit with that smell, the unmistakable smell of rotting flesh. On the bathtub, there were traces of human degradation. On the stools and kitchen counter, traces of cooking implements mingling with blood. It was a place of evil that was so deep, even experienced detectives were shaken. Some of Fan's dismembered parts were found in plastic bags and dumpsters across several towns. But her skull was still there and was eventually used as evidence in the trial, kept at the Kowloon Public Mortuary during appeals. And on March 26, 2004, it was released to her birth family before being cremated. The 3 men, Chan, Xing Cho, and Wei Lun, were eventually arrested. At the time of Chan's capture, he was living in Shek Lai Estate with his wife and their newborn child. She was briefly questioned and released, not charged. Wei Lun actually evaded arrest for 9 months, sneaking across the border to Wanxi. He was caught there in mid-February of 2000 and extradited just days later. The landlords that owned the apartment had no connection to the crime. The trial began on October 20th of 2000, and for 6 weeks the prosecution explained the shreds of evidence such as testimonies, dismembered remains, and the voice of a haunted teenager to piece together the horror of what happened behind those closed doors. Fan Man-yee's life was cruelly taken from this world, her humanity nearly forgotten. Ah Fong was offered immunity in exchange for her testimony since she was a minor. During the trial, there were conflicting stories. The defense argued that Fan had overdosed on methamphetamine, and they pointed to the lack of a full body as proof the prosecution could not establish intent to kill. The men admitted to binding Fan and dismembering her body, but denied that any of them actually caused her death. However, the jury sided with this, that however it happened, Fan died as a result of their actions. In the days that followed, reporters described a tense, almost surreal scene. You could hear the sobs in the gallery, gasps when psychiatric findings were read, and moments of stunned silence. At the end of the year, the 8-man, 1-woman jury delivered their verdict: guilty of manslaughter, not murder, because there was no solid evidence of intent to kill. But it was clear that Fan did not simply die. She was killed by abuse. The judge did not hold back. Speaking directly to the 3 men, he issued a sentence of life imprisonment with no chance of parole for 20 years. He condemned their actions as the most depraved, ghastly crimes he had encountered in modern Hong Kong, saying, quote, "Never in Hong Kong in recent years has a court heard of such cruelty, depravity, callousness, brutality, violence, and viciousness. Even an animal would not have been maltreated in the same way." End quote. He also said the 3 men had psychopathic tendencies, were dangerous, and unfit for society. As he handed down the maximum sentence for manslaughter, he said what so many were thinking, that Fan had been failed long before her death. She had been failed by the institutions meant to protect her, and a system that never saw her pain. She was also failed by the people around her who turned away. How many others might be suffering right now behind closed doors, unheard and unseen? Fan Man-yee was a young woman with dreams and a past that she was trying to escape to make a better life for her and her son. She deserved so much better than the violence she suffered, and she definitely deserved better from the justice system that labeled her case as manslaughter instead of the cold-blooded murder that it was. Even during the sentencing, the judge acknowledged the collective disbelief. He also said, quote, "The public is entitled to protection from people such as you." And yes, technically in Hong Kong, life means life, but the possibility of them one day walking free has never sat right with the people who remembered what happened in that flat. After the trial, the apartment building was left empty. Tenants moved out. No one wanted to live where something so evil had happened. Some even said Fan's spirit still lingered there. A few months after the verdict, Chan and his co-defendants appealed, but on August 13, 2007, the verdict was affirmed without change. Beyond the courtroom, this case had a hold on the public in a different way. It wasn't just horror, though. It was fascination, too. People were drawn to every new headline and every detail from the courtroom. Sales clerks and stylists in the city admitted they were obsessed. They couldn't look away. One woman said, "It's horrible, but it's so interesting." Another said that this kind of thing might have happened somewhere like New York or across the border on the mainland, but definitely not in Hong Kong. It didn't even seem real. It was a crime that was hard for people to wrap their minds around. Just to know people were capable of thinking up such heinous acts was horrifying. Hong Kong's media dubbed it the Hello Kitty murder, not just because of the doll, but because of what that doll represented. Hello Kitty was soft, innocent, and known around the world. Her round face and tiny bow were everywhere, from bedrooms, backpacks, and in shop windows. She was and still is a symbol of childhood, of sweetness, and now of death. That clash of the macabre and innocence was extremely disturbing. To so many, that contradiction became the very reason they couldn't stop following the case. We all can have moments where we find ourselves drawn to something dark, something tragic or unsettling, and we wonder, why am I even interested in this? That feeling is morbid curiosity, and it's actually a very human response. Morbid curiosity comes from a mix of things, like our survival instincts, wanting to understand the world, and even the way we connect socially. Our brains are wired to pay attention to potential threats or things that feel dangerous, not because we enjoy suffering, but because learning about it helps us feel a little more prepared or less powerless. Sometimes something is so shocking or disturbing that we can't look away, not because we're cold or twisted, but because we're trying to make sense of something that feels impossible to understand. It might feel strange or even a little icky, but nobody is alone in that. It's normal to be curious about the darker sides of life. It doesn't mean we're broken, it means we're human. In Hong Kong, where homicide rates were so low, 1.23 per 100,000 compared to global standards, the brutality of this crime had the community rattled. Even though Chan, Xing Cho, and Wei Lun were convicted of manslaughter rather than murder, the severity of the torture when it came to Fan's death started intense public debate. These conversations triggered reforms in evidence standards. The Department of Justice placed greater importance on techniques to determine cause of death, even when remains were incomplete. Professionals across forensic recording and autopsy protocols received funding for enhanced training, particularly in cases where bodies had been disposed of in ways that made determining intent difficult. Legal experts acknowledged that the case exposed a blind spot in Hong Kong's justice system when intent and cause of death couldn't be clearly linked. Council lawmakers responded in 2001 by amending Criminal Procedure Ordinance Section 27 to allow more flexible interpretation of death causes and intent, even without a full autopsy. Though these changes were controversial, they plainly pointed out the judiciary's need to adapt to forensics as they make new discoveries. In 2012, that apartment building was bought by a new investor and torn down completely as an attempt to erase its place in history. But you can't just bulldoze away the story of what happened there. 4 years later, a hotel named Soravit took its place. 3 Buddha portraits were installed as a memorial to a tragedy that should have never happened. Chan and Wei Lun continue to serve life sentences in Stanley Prison. Xing Cho had his term reduced to 18 years on appeal in March of 2004 and was released in April of 2014. Even then, he had not changed. In 2022, he was convicted of child sexual assault and returned to prison. Fan Man-yee's story was never meant as shock entertainment. It was and still is a cautionary tale and a call to look deeper at the systems that fail the most vulnerable and have for decades. Something has to change. Fan's story of exploitation, injustice, and the haunting of a city still lives on. We will always remember Fan as a wonderful young mother who was trying so hard despite the odds being stacked against her. She was determined to make a better life for her and her son. If that chance had not been stolen from her, I wonder what her life could have been like and where she'd be today. Let us always remember Fan and keep her son that she loved so much in our thoughts. I don't know where he is today. His name appears to have been kept out of the public eye. This story is not only about what happened in that apartment, it's also about the wreckage that violence leaves behind. A boy without a mother. His life totally changed from whatever Fan had hoped for. But I hope he was well taken care of and is doing well today wherever he might be. We all send our love out to him. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, friends, stay safe out there, take care of yourselves, and let's watch out for each other.
Thank you for listening to this episode. As we close out, let us not forget awareness is our greatest defense. In a world that can be dark and grim, vigilance is our beacon of hope. When it comes to the cases we have explored together that have remained unsolved, if you happen to hold a piece of the puzzle, dare to step forward. As author Lois McMaster Bujold once said, "The dead cannot cry out for justice. It is a duty of the living to do so for them." Until we reconvene, my friends, stay vigilant and stay informed.